Fall is by far my favorite time of year to take photos, specifically because the colors of the leaves and trees are just so nice this time of year. Here are a few absolute bangers that I've snapped this year, and I still have some more shoots planned, so stay tuned. But what happens when you go out to take fall photos and you take them and they don't have those amazing rich colors that everyone on Instagram has? Instead of this deep reddish orange color, you get more of like a yellowy green. Well, it's all in the edit, and today I'm going to give you some editing tips on how to make your fall photos pop. So let's head over to Lightroom and I'll show you what's up. All right, we got Lightroom open here. I got 3 photos lined up for us. Let's go through them and I'll show you how I would edit them from start to finish. All right, starting off with a drone shot. This one is really cool. So this is a top-down shot of a forest. I've actually already gone ahead and I do this with all my drone shots. This is actually a combination of 3 photos. On the drone, I turn on auto exposure bracketing, which means every time I take a photo, it takes 3 photos, 1 at the exposure I set, 1 darker and 1 brighter, and then I can combine them together into an HDR image. This is especially helpful on the Mini 2 because the dynamic range on that camera is not the best, so helps get just a little more depth out of the photo. But this is a little underexposed, so first thing I'm gonna do is correct the exposure a little bit. The next thing I would do is go for white balance, but honestly, I think this looks okay for white balance. I might warm it up just a touch. Touch of contrast. Look at that, it already just makes those colors pop. Normally I'd bring the highlights down a bit, but there's nothing too bright in this image, so I'm gonna leave them. I'm gonna bring the shadows up because there's a lot of shadowy areas here. And then looking at my histogram here, I usually just adjust my whites and blacks to sort of even out the histogram. So you see there's like not a lot of whites in the image right now. I'm gonna drag the whites up. Not too much though. Something like that. And then bring the blacks down a little bit until we get some blacks in the image. Then we can bring up the texture and clarity a little bit. Definitely don't like to overdo that. Now, part of my sort of fall moody vibes that I go for, I kind of hate that word, but you know, is I like to do a little bit of crushing the blacks here. So we're gonna bring this down. Then we're gonna bring up the bottom point on the tone curve just a little bit. Not too much. If you go too much, it looks really weird. But if we bring it up just a tiny bit, what that's doing is taking all the pure blacks in the photo and making them a little bit more of a gray. It kind of washes out the photo and definitely doesn't work for every image, but for a lot of these sort of darker, moodier kind of photos, I think it works really well. I'm actually gonna bring up the exposure just a little bit more. Okay, now going to the HSL, this is where the magic happens when it comes to fall photos, because as you can see here, we've got a lot of green, we've got a lot of yellow, bit of orange, and a tiny bit of red. I really want a more orangish, reddish color tone for this. So we're gonna start by bringing the greens towards the yellows a little bit. I don't want to completely get rid of the greens because that looks really unnatural, so I just want to shift them a little bit over. Then we'll bring the yellows over to the oranges. That's going to make the biggest difference here. Something around -40 seems to look good. And then I'll bring the oranges to the reds just a little bit. And now I'm actually going to desaturate some of these colors here. I'm going to bring the greens down and then bring the yellows down a little bit too. And now we have a really nice kind of contrasty looking photo here. For this one, I'm gonna skip the color grading. I just don't think this photo needs it, but I might use it for the other ones. And now another great Lightroom trick, if your photos are looking a little bit greenish and you want more of that orangish color, is come down to your calibration tab. Under the blue primary slider, shift the hues. If we go to the left here, you can see it's gonna shift everything towards a really warm color. This is if I go all the way. Don't do this. But if we do it just a little bit, we get a little bit more warmish, orangish colors. And there we go. This is what we started with, and this is what we ended up with. All right, we got a person in here this time walking down the path. And this is a perfect example of, it's the middle of fall, the colors should look great. I'm gonna ramp the exposure a little bit because it is a little dark. But you can see we've got a lot of yellows and a lot of greens, but not really anything orange. A lot of orange on the ground here, but that's not really helpful. So first I'm gonna warm it up a little bit. Since we're in the shade, it usually gets a little bit more blue, so I'm gonna make it nice and warm first. That already brings some yellows into the greens and gets closer to the fall look that we're going for. And now we're gonna do the same thing we did to the other photo to make it a little more moody. Bring the highlights down to kind of recover some of the detail up in the top left here. Bring the shadows up because this is a pretty dark photo. And I'm not going to touch the whites or blacks because we already have a white point and black point on our histogram. And then we're going to do a similar tone curve to the last one. I'm going to add a point here, bring the shadows down just a little bit, but then flatten the blacks just a little bit. Again, very subtle adjustments on the tone curve. You don't want to go over the top with this. Okay, now we're going to mess with this again. We're going to take the greens a little bit, not too much because I don't want to completely get rid of the greens, into the yellows, yellows, into the oranges. This one is where it makes a huge difference. So we can really make this dramatic. And then because we have a person in this one, I'm not gonna touch the oranges slider too much because that's where the skin tones fall under. And if we move the orange slider around, the skin tones are gonna start to look weird. I might do just a tiny bit into the reds. Okay, now even though we warmed up the photo, this path is still kind of blue and the sky is still a little blue. I don't really like how that's looking for this photo. So the first thing I'm gonna do in the saturation is desaturate the blues. It's a subtle difference, but in the path here, we're just getting rid of some of the blues in the areas where there just shouldn't be any. Again, the green kind of stands out here now because so much of this is orange, so I really want to desaturate the greens. And then I'm going to desaturate the yellows a bit because this is looking way too vibrant, way too fake up here. So we'll bring the yellows down a little bit, and that'll hopefully make it feel a little more natural, at least not too noticeable that we shifted the colors. And then I'm gonna bring the orange saturation up a little bit. Let's see if the red does anything. No, there's not really any reds in this photo, so we're gonna leave that as it is. Okay, now for this one, we'll try some color grading. The first thing I wanna do is add some blue to the shadows because we already have a lot of orange going in here, and blue's kind of a contrast to orange. So if we pair them up, it'll create a nice color contrast. The way that I pick the exact shade that I'm gonna add into the shadows here is I go all the way to the extreme, which this obviously looks bad right now, but hold on. So just move it around. I think I'm feeling something kind of in the bluish, closer to purple than to teal, I think in there. And then once I like that color, we're gonna back it off and go like just the tiniest little bit. You see, I just moved it from the center to there, barely anything. And then we'll try adding, there's already so much warmth in this photo, I don't think we really need any more, but I'll try adding a little bit of orange. Same thing, I'm gonna pick a color by maxing it out, and maybe there, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, and then we'll pull it back. And then let's just turn it off and on. Very subtle. I think I'll just leave it like that. I like to keep it really subtle with the color grading because if you go too far, it just looks really over edited, and not a fan. All right, little progress here. This is what we started with, and this is where we're at right now. A vignette would look nice. And I'm gonna add a little bit of grain to this one. I kind of like grainy photos. It depends, it really depends, but for this kind of stuff, I think it looks nice. And then we already have a very orange palette here. So let's see what happens if we drag this slider. So we can make it very orange and red. Not a fan of that. Okay, so that's basically the edit done, but I'm gonna add some local adjustments. I love the radial gradient tool for this because I can just kind of shape it, put it right over our little subject here, right in the middle, and then I'll brighten it up just a little bit. Now, if you do this a lot, it looks like really fake, but if we add just a touch of exposure on here, make sure your feathering is maxed out at 100, and then I'll add one more, sort of like a reverse vignette, brightening up the middle instead of darkening the edges. Empty exposure, again, just a touch, tiny bit, like 0.25 is what we're going for here. Just a little before and after, just, it really helps draw your eye into the center of the photo when the center is a little bit brighter. All right, and that photo's done. So again, before, this is what we started with, very green, very dark, not really fitting the fall vibe. And this is what we end up with, very drastic, but unless you see the before and after, you don't really know how much we've done to the photo here. You can kind of tell, especially if you're a photographer and you edit like this, you can kind of tell this orange is a little bit fake, but most people looking at this, they're just gonna see a nice fall photo. All right, and then lastly, of course, we got a WRX photo here. There's this telephone pole in the background that I don't like, so we'll remove that too for this one. But we're gonna do a very similar edit. I won't talk through this one as much because I'm basically doing the same thing. Now there is the sort of ethical question. I don't even know if you'd call it ethical, but just a question of, is it okay like to fake this stuff? Because you're creating this scenario that isn't real, right? You're creating this like super vibrant, bright orange fall colors, and people see that and they want to go explore that and experience that, but it's never really quite real. I mean, you can absolutely see some beautiful fall colors in person, but is it disingenuous to edit the photos like this? Honestly, I don't think so, because where do you draw the line, right? I don't do, personally, if I'm editing photos of people, I don't modify anything about their body that is a part of them. I've had people ask me to make them look skinnier, make their face shape look a little different, and I don't do that kind of stuff because then it's not them anymore. So for me, that's where I draw the line. But if you're just talking about the colors of the photos, like, yeah, this is not what this actually looked like, but it's hard to draw a line when you're talking about just shifting the colors in a photo, because you can even argue that changing the white balance is doing that. So I think it can be hard to say like, oh, I'm not going to edit my photos, I'm going to make them look as realistic as possible, because by that standard, if you do any editing to the photos at all, you're lying, which isn't really the case. Editing is just the photographer's artistic interpretation. That's how I like to think of it. Okay, we're almost done with this photo. I've done more or less the same edits that I did to the other ones here, and now I'll add some local adjustments again. For car photos, this is going to be a little different. For one, I have some license plate holes because I moved my plate over to the side and they look really ugly right here. So first thing I'm gonna do is touch up my car. You can really see my car. So I just posted these on Instagram, and I said in the caption like my car was really dirty. You can't really tell when it's zoomed out, but As soon as you zoom in, you can see all the dirt and stuff on the, especially on the front bumper here. So we'll remove that. And then there's also this pole in the background that's kind of distracting and makes us feel like we're not really in nature. Normally I'd like to bring this into Photoshop because I don't like doing big removals like this in Lightroom, but we can do it. Let's switch over to clone and we'll do this in chunks. Oh, I don't like that. Lightroom samples from the weirdest areas. Like, why would it choose there? Like, this is, choose over here. Much better. Again, sampling from the weirdest spots. This is why I don't like Lightroom for this. There's also, I just noticed, I don't think I noticed this on the Instagram edit I did, but there's also a telephone wire right here. Or a power, whatever this is. Quickly remove that. So that's our removal before and after. Now for the local adjustments, again, radial gradient is my best friend. We'll zoom in here. I'll first do one on the logo, then we'll do one on the whole car, like this. Again, making very small adjustments here because it's gonna be obvious otherwise, and done. Okay, so before, this is what we started with, and after the edit. This is really dramatic, but I think this looks so cool. Subaru, if you're watching, my DMs are open. And there you go. I hope you learned something about how to turn your fall photos into absolute bangers. Is that a word we still say, bangers? Either way, thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and I will catch you in the next one.